My aunt passed away from cancer. She was a seamstress, so when we got home from the hospital to clear out the house, one of the first things we needed to move was her giant industrial sewing machine. It was a Muslim Asian household where hundreds will come to mourn, so the furniture is removed to allow more floor space. It was one of those big, heavy sewing machines, attached to the table that was also metal. It took 4 pretty huge 6-foot-plus grown men to lift it and move it out of the living room. When they moved it, I was the one vacuuming that room, and I saw one of the rubber feet on the table slip off and a scrap of rubbish fall out of the table leg. Thinking it was obviously just broken bits of rubber, I went over to clean it up, and realized it was a little parcel of black silk wrapped in cling film. Having no clue what it was, I loudly exclaimed and asked people to come and look. Turns out it was a form of curse, known as taviz in Islam. My cousin, the son of the aunt who had died, said she had previously gone to see a sheikh, Islamic medium type, who told her that a curse had been hidden in her house and that she would never find it. You have to find them and dispose of them if you want to counteract the curse. The curse was a spell someone had made so that she would never recover from her cancer. It's all well and good, someone saying or doing those things, and whether you want to believe them or not. But the creepiest parts of it were that A, it took 4 huge men to move it, so nobody could have sneakily hidden it there under one leg, and B, it really never would have been found until she died, as nobody would ever have moved her sewing machine that had been there from the day she moved in. The folklore about these curses is that when people get into that stuff, they're basically selling their soul to the devil, or jinns, and it's the dark entities that hide them for you. Ever since I locked my keys in my car one time, I keep a spare car key in a pocket in my wallet. I hadn't needed it for years. After leaving the gym, I found that my car key was missing from the key ring. No other keys were missing. I went back into the gym and checked all the machines I used, but I didn't find the key on the floor anywhere. So I told the front desk to please keep a lookout for a missing loose car key. I pulled the spare out of my wallet pocket, put it onto my key ring, and used that to drive home. When I got home, I found a car key sitting on my desk at home. So either my key teleported home without my car, or I, for no reason and without realizing it, took the key off the ring and placed it on the desk, used the spare to drive to work in the gym, retrieving it from and returning it to the wallet pocket each time, and was surprised to finally notice that this was the case upon exiting the gym. So I'm cooking dinner the other night, and I go to reach for the oregano. Now to explain, I fucking love oregano. I use it all the time. And as a result, it's always in the same place in the cupboard, front and center. We have several cupboards, but only one for ingredients, such as herbs, spices, all that sort of shit. I live with my girlfriend, but she pretty much doesn't go in that cupboard because I do all the cooking. She burns things, and I love cooking, so it works out well. So I reach for the oregano, and it's not there. No oregano. I know I didn't finish it and throw it away. I know it, but it's not there. I take everything out and nothing. There's not a hint of that beautiful herb in sight. So I ask her where she's moved it. The only logical explanation is she's had some sort of dried herb craving and gone on the hunt. But she denies any knowledge and says she's not opened that cupboard for days. I'd cooked with it the day before, so the plot thickened. Anyway, I cook my shitty oregano-less meal and forget about it. The next day we go to the shop, and obviously my first mission is to fill the oregano-shaped hole in my cupboard, so off I trot to purchase that most delightful leaf, and back home we go. I bought other stuff too, obviously, but nobody's reading this for my shopping list. After cooking, back my sweet child goes into his rightful home, front and center of the cupboard, and all is good with the world. Until the next day I open the cupboard, and what am I greeted with? 2 fucking jars of oregano. Yep, there they both are, plain as day, staring at me and tempting me with their stunning herby goodness, right besides each other, front and center. What a roller coaster of emotions. I have a twin brother, and we both remember a guy we called Uncle Jojo. He was an old guy. I can picture him so clearly in my mind. When my brother and I describe him to each other, he looks exactly the same. One thing we both remember is that he was missing his right index finger and half of his middle finger. We both have really vivid memories of him taking us to the lake and buying us various food. He taught us how to make a tire swing, which is still by the lake. We both remember putting it up with him. We've noticed that no one has any idea who he is. Not our parents, not our older siblings. They remember absolutely nothing. They told us we used to escape a lot. All the doors would be locked, and we'd both somehow escape, and they could never find us until we came wandering back hours later. They called the police several times, and we'd knock on the door just as they got through, even if they'd just been looking down the street and we weren't there. My brother and I have no idea what could have happened. All of this happened between the ages of 4 and 8, and then we never saw him again. When we look back at pictures, days when we were sure he was there, he's not in any of them. It feels like he's supposed to be there. Sometimes there's a weird gap right around where my brother and I are standing. This happened tonight. My son's birthday is today. We are all currently quarantined due to being exposed to someone who has COVID. Since we had to cancel our plans, we decided to take a drive. We went to an old church, or Masonic lodge, it's now not used at all, that is hometown famous for a big goat statue mounted on top of the steeple. The statue was a gift from someone in Dundee, Scotland. It's a very old place. No one was around, so my son and I decided to look around. We got to ring this huge brass bell by pulling a rope. My boyfriend and other son were far away from us in the empty parking lot. We left and they were amazed at how loud the bell was. Anyway, we kept driving and exploring until it got dark. My oldest son said he wanted to stop at the graveyard and then go and ring the bell one more time. It's his birthday, so I said, "As you wish, my darling." We walked to the graveyard, paid respect to extremely old graves, and even picked up trash. We always do this when hiking and exploring. Then just down the road we went back to the Masonic Lodge. We pulled in, again no one around. This area is very open. The wide yard you walk across to get to the building is clear of trees. The church is right by the busy highway. No sidewalk, steep stairs. My boyfriend and I decided to stay by the van to smoke a cigarette. I could see the black outlines of my 2 boys walking towards the front of the church. It's not super far, but it takes a minute to walk to the building, due to the yard being quite mushy and kind of bumpy. Well, suddenly out of nowhere, there were what looked like 3 more young men or teen boys walking towards my kids and approaching them quickly, as though they knew my kids. My first thought was, okay, I better get over there and make sure these boys ain't up to no good. But I also thought, where the hell did they come from? I immediately walked towards them to make sure all was well. I heard the bell ring. Then suddenly, one of the unknown silhouettes charged my oldest son, and as this happened, my boyfriend ran with his knife out yelling, "Hey!" at the people. He ran around the corner to approach the group. I was behind him, but not as fast. As I approached the steps, my boyfriend and my kids were starting to run to the car. There was no one there but my family, and I said, "Where are they?" They just replied, Go, run, go Mom, run. I repeated, where are those people, as I ran. They replied, there are no people, go. So we skedaddled back to the car. On our way home, we of course talked about this insane experience the whole time. We saw 3 people walk up to my kids, right next to them. It looked almost like they had all planned to meet there. They were walking as a group until one started running towards my son with intent. But my boys never saw them. There was no one there. There is no way they couldn't have noticed them, and nowhere for them to hide after. It's all very open there, so no hiding spots. The boys also described how when they reached the steps, it felt like a dream, got nervous, and they quickly rang the bell before my boyfriend got to them. This brass bell is old and loud. It can be heard far and wide. Both boys rang it. I only heard it once, and I saw 3 people disappear. My boyfriend and youngest son felt nervous and negative and scared the whole way home. My oldest and I were excited and felt no malignancy whatsoever. My oldest and I have always loved all things paranormal, but tonight removed that little piece of doubt in the back of my mind. I never thought something like that would happen, not just to me, but my whole family. We prayed for protection on the way home and got home safe and sound. You never know. Anything can happen. From as young as I can remember, I had a friend who I could talk to who lived in the wardrobe. Now back when I was a child, 6 or under, I was always in bed very, very early. In fact, some might say it was poor parenting now, but my childhood at that age consisted of waking at 7:30 a.m., going to preschool and infant school, which finished at 3 p.m., then coming home, having tea, and straight to bed. It was a staple that we would watch Play School, which finished at 4 p.m., and then have a race, me and my sister, who could go up to bed quickest, seeing as only good children went to bed, bad children had to stay up. Great reverse psychology there. Anyway, my friend, who I can still see now, not really see but visualize, well, he was an older man in his late 50s perhaps, normal human size, with a white beard that was perhaps 1.5 inches long. He wore lumberjack clothing and had a great big axe. I had never seen a lumberjack or axe before, so when I first saw one years later, I knew what he had been. My father and mother would often hear me talking in my room and having a one-sided conversation with someone, but they never came in and they simply thought it was a childhood friend. And they were right, for some part at least, that being that I only ever saw him as a child. I don't recall what we talked about, but I got the feeling that the old man was lonely, needed a friend, and was always there for me when I was on my own. I felt very comfortable with him around. One day when I was around 6, I came home and my father was in the back garden, and he was chopping up my beautiful old oak wardrobe. Breaking it, smashing it, and eventually burning it, he made sure it was gone forever. But that was just him, his way of getting rid of rubbish. He liked to, and even now, take something and break it into the smallest pieces possible. I guess this was just his thing. Point being, my wardrobe was gone. In its place was a new, or relatively new IKEA-type wardrobe, which was flimsy and ugly. I didn't like it, and it wasn't of the quality of the one I had. But there was nothing I could do, and sadly, once the new wardrobe was put in place of the old one, and the old one destroyed, the lumberjack never returned. He was gone, forever. This was something that happened to me about 5 years ago. At the time, I was staying in an office space converted into an apartment. The place was quite spacious, with windows that filled 2/3 of the wall. Across the street was a small studio apartment building, with its windows facing my room, so I installed window blinds on every window as soon as I moved in, and kept the blinds down at all times. I got the room cheap because the landlord was a shaman. In Korea, people consider shamans to be unclean, whatever the word means, and avoid living near them. Therefore, wherever shamans live, rent in the neighborhood drops considerably. And that is good news to people like me who are not that superstitious. Personally, I found my landlord to be quite personable. He was about my father's age, soft-spoken, considerate, and well-mannered. Sure, sometimes I could faintly hear him chanting in the middle of the night when his patron spirit possessed him, or at least that's what he sheepishly confessed when I probed about it. But frankly, I didn't mind at all. The rent was unbelievably cheap, and hey, everyone's a little weird, right? Anyway, one night I woke up from sleep. Well, maybe woke up are not the right words. What happened was, one moment I was in a dreamless coma, then next, I was staring at a pair of small, very white feet peeking out of an ankle-length black skirt hemmed with decorative white lace. The transition from unconsciousness to wakefulness was so abrupt that it took me a moment to process what my eyes were seeing. After staring dumbly at those feet for a while, my brain produced several thoughts. I'm living alone, so why am I seeing feet other than mine? Mine are large and hairy. Feet don't usually hang in the air, so why are they? I started to feel panic slowly rising from the depth of my soul. I wanted to find out to whom those feet were attached, so I slowly lifted my eyes. Then I saw the girl. She was facing away from me, toward the window, which was wide open and letting in the moonlight that was flooding in the room. Never in my life have I seen such a bright moon. The illumination was so beautiful that it looked almost supernatural, and the girl was hovering in the air, head lifted toward the moon. She was basking in the streaming light and gently swaying in the breeze I could not feel. Her head was a bit too small to be human, and she wore her hair down with a braid. She was of a slight build and was wearing some kind of black dress with white laces at the hem. And as I noticed before, she was barefoot. While I was taking in all these little details, my brain was desperately trying to convince myself that what I was seeing wasn't real. I failed. I tried to sit up and found out that I couldn't move my limbs at all. That terrified me. I screamed, but all that came out was a muffled whisper because my tongue and lips were paralyzed too. However, that was enough to get the hovering girl's attention. When the sound somehow escaped from my closed mouth, she started, and then in one smooth move, she spun in the air to face me. She had a very small, delicate nose and lips that were also too small to be human. And her eyes, I simply could not see them. The upper part of her face was shrouded by such a deep shadow that I could not make anything out of it. Despite that, I could somehow read her expression. She seemed somewhat alarmed and confused. She glided across the room to investigate the bed I was lying on, and then lowered her head as if she wanted to examine my face. The black abyss that was the upper part of her face was inches away from me. The terror was just too much for me. With all the strength I could muster, I kicked. It broke the paralysis and my foot flew up, but she practically blinked away from my kick with a horrified expression, and then my eyes fluttered open, and she vanished. Okay, let me explain. I thought I was awake when I first saw the ghost girl's feet, but it turned out that this whole time my eyes were actually closed. However, the room looked exactly the same as before I opened my eyes. The window was still completely open, the window blind was rolled up, and the supernatural moonlight was still streaming down into my room. The thing is, I never, ever opened the window, let alone roll up the blind because of the building across the street. I still think about what happened that night from time to time. It could very well have been a vivid dream. But then, that doesn't really explain the open window and rolled up blind. Sure, it is entirely possible that I somehow sleepwalked to the windows and opened them without my brain remembering it. But to me, That's even more disturbing than believing in the hovering girl's existence. My friends and I all got together at a pizza place in our small town, taking 2 cars to get there. We had parked right next to each other. Both of our cars at the time were very distinctive. Each one had bumper stickers, uncommon colors, and the characteristic dents that come with slightly older, beater cars. As we were leaving, we decided to go to our other friend's house. She was riding in the other car, and I didn't know the way to her house, so I was going to follow them there. Another friend in my car, however, said she knew a faster way, so I opted to follow my friend's car, and then if we were to get lost, I'd have the friend in my car to get us there as a backup. They pulled out first and turned onto the street, and I pulled out directly after. Keep in mind it was before 8 o'clock in a small town, and my friend had a distinct car. They started taking streets that would loop us in a circle, and knowing full well that they knew the way, I called up the driver friend and told her to cut the shit. I knew they were leading us in circles. She was just as confused as I was, because she said that she was following me, on the same exact street, because they wanted to try taking the shortcut too. I only saw my own car and the one directly in front of me, that I'm certain was hers, and she only saw mine too, that she's certain was mine. Multiple friends were in both cars to confirm what they saw, and confirm no one was joking. I have no explanation. My friend and I ended up getting weirded out when we both insisted we were following the other, so we agreed we would both pull over exactly where we were. So I pulled over. The doppelganger car just continued on. I heard my friends on the other line freaking out as my car, the doppelganger car, drove off as well. I was still pulled over. We had been driving close enough to see a massive characteristic dent and specific bumper sticker, not to mention the fact that her car hadn't left my line of sight since we all got in. This is a long one. Buckle up. I still don't know why I had to go through this, but I can assure you with every ounce of my being that this was real. About 8 years ago, my family moved into a new house that was abandoned halfway through building it. I was so excited because I finally would get my own room. I was 10 when we moved in, and I had 4 younger siblings. After getting settled and living in the house for about a month, my family paid a casual trip to my grandparents' house that was only about 5 minutes away from ours. Now, I've been to their house thousands of times, and even lived there when my parents were looking for a home. There was nothing out of the ordinary here, except it was a mansion in the middle of a ranch. It went as any other evening would go, and my dad buckled us kids up in our minivan. He walked back to the front porch to say goodbye to Grandma and Grandpa with my mom. While sitting in the van, I noticed a man standing on the balcony above us, just staring at me. He was through the window, directly above my parents. I nudged my sister and pointed, and she saw him too. We laughed and waved, thinking it was my grandpa, but he didn't smile back. We didn't think anything of this, and when we got home, my sister brought it up to my mom. She panicked, telling my dad to call the police, thinking that someone broke into their house. I told them it was Grandpa, but they responded, "No, Molly, we were talking to both Grandma and Grandpa on the front porch, remember?" I was immediately confused, but after the sheriff came by, a quick inspection pushed all anxiety out the door, and we never talked about it again. But things only got worse from then on. I felt like a person was breathing down my neck at every waking moment. I saw orbs in the bathroom mirrors and couldn't go in there without the door open. I started asking my mom really strange questions like, did someone die in this house? And when she said the home was brand new, I would ask her, well, did someone die while building this place? Of course, my parents thought nothing of this and ignored all red flags. About a year later, I was home alone watching my siblings, and they all fell fast asleep on the couch watching a movie. Suddenly, I looked up to see a small child on the stairs, just staring at me, holding the bars, crouched down. My heart lurched into my throat as I whipped my head around to count my siblings. I called my mom, begging her to come home, so they did, but while I waited, the child never moved. I tried to tell my mom what happened, but she claimed it was a dream or my imagination. It hurt to know I was really alone in this. Things just kept getting so much worse, though. I would have panic attacks late at night, hallucinations of people chasing me and trying to kill me. I sleepwalked all over the house and always ended up over my parents' bed, just staring at them. I had a reoccurring dream of a spirit taking me away from my family, dragging me out of my house. I would see people out of the corner of my eye, and of course, more horrid incidents occurred. One night, I was asleep when I heard my door creak open. Now let me explain the layout of my childhood bedroom. My bed was centered in the middle of my room, with a desk on one side and a 16-gallon fish aquarium on the other. This aquarium lit up my entire room, so it was never dark. I had a dresser across from me, with a door across from my aquarium. I heard the door creak open slowly, and I jolted awake, staring at the door. The child walked in. But there was something seriously wrong. It was pitch black, a silhouette, with ragged hair and a nightgown on. I know, typical demonic stuff. I had never been more petrified in my entire life. I could not move or scream or anything. The thing walked slowly until it reached my aquarium, only a foot away from my head. It lifted an arm and tapped the glass, then started rocking back and forth. I pulled the covers over my head and tried to breathe. I was terrified. I don't know how long I was under the covers, but after what felt like hours, I peeked out to see nothing there, but my door still wide open. I lunged out of bed and ran all the way down to my parents' room below me. I screamed and cried, trying to convince them what happened, but they insisted it was my sister. I refused to step foot in my room for days. A week later, I finally felt better about the incident. My dad and I rearranged all the furniture in my room to make me feel safe. My bed was in a corner. My desk was turned around facing my room, and the aquarium had a dim light so I couldn't see my room. I was changing into a paranoid little girl who could barely step foot in her own home. My mom noticed too. She was worried, but thought my anxiety was getting worse, because I was having panic attacks every other night, screaming about deranged dreams I had. Finally, one morning my dad called everyone into the living room, very pale and very serious. "I have something to tell you," he said, "but I don't want you to be scared. It's over now." He went on to tell us about the night prior. He was woken up by my mom, who left the room to check on the baby upstairs. Suddenly, he was covered by a dark mist that was pressing him into his bed, strangling him. He yelled, but no one heard him. He tried to fight back, but he was paralyzed. As a religious man, he used the power of God to command the spirit to leave and never come back again. My mom heard nothing when she came back. Once he finished, my 6-year-old sister came out with her own experiences. Yes, there's more, and again, it gets worse. My mom wasn't telling me things. My sister's friends, all of them, refused to step foot in her room. "I don't like that room," they would say. "There is something very bad in there." They would always ask to go home early and never want to come back. One of the kiddos claimed that a scary girl ran out of the closet and out of the bedroom into the hallway and didn't come back. Even my sister had her own incident. There were 3 men telling me that I wasn't leaving. They were laughing at me. Even Maggie, who was only 3, was crying. So I crawled into her crib and covered her eyes. They never went away. I was shocked that I wasn't the only one, and that no one was sharing this with me. I was angry and scared. Why would they not believe me? I was alone, dealing with this demon for years. So many questions have come into my mind. It was a demon, no doubt. Was I sleepwalking because I was possessed? Research concluded that for me. I indeed very possibly could have been possessed. Every time I share this story, the feelings come back, and the trauma comes back. I revisit that night in my room when the spirit was only inches away, taunting me. This has scarred me for the 8 years that I've tried to move on, and I just can't. But why me? Why was it obsessed with me? And why did it follow my family home? I guess we will never know. So I live in France, and back in my youth, I had the most surreal experiences that I can't explain to this day. My family and I moved to the north of France when I was about 5 years old, into this beautiful house that was surrounded by very tall trees. When I was about 8, I decided that I wanted my own room upstairs. Therefore, my mom and dad set one up for me. Here I don't recall what I'm about to tell, because my mom told me about this years later. The first night I spent in the room, halfway through the night I started screaming. My mom ran upstairs to see what was happening. When she turned the light on, apparently I was in a fetal position staring at the wall. The next year and a half, I spent it sleeping with both my parents and never went back upstairs. Things happen, parents divorce, and I went to live in England with my mom while my dad stayed in France in that house. I used to come and see him every summer holiday. When I was about 16, I stayed upstairs but in a different room. When you came upstairs, there was a mezzanine and the door that opens to the narrow corridor with rooms on each side. My room was the last one at the end of the corridor. By then, my mom told me that her mother, and my sister are sensitive to certain things that not everyone can feel. One night, I could hear someone running up and down the corridor and lightly knock on my door. This never bothered me because I didn't feel I was in danger, and this happened most nights after the first one where I acknowledged it. A few things continued that you could call strange, such as when I got out of the shower, I could see fingerprints on the mirror with all the condensation. Again, that didn't bother me too much as I didn't feel in danger. This carried on for a few years every time I was back in the house. A few years later, I was about 22. My dad decided to move, so my room was already emptied by the time summer came around. There was still a room downstairs where I could sleep. The first week before the move was absolutely fine, until 2 days before actually leaving the house for good. So I'm laying in bed. In front of me, there are 2 huge windows that look into the garden. While I'm laying there, I can see a tall figure. I can clearly see the shape of a head, shoulders, and torso, but no legs. And my brain starts to think, well, it's dark, full moon. Must be the shadows of the trees. In those situations, you try to rationalize as well as possible. I kept staring for a good 20 seconds, which seemed short, but trust me, in that moment it felt like ages. I could see the trees moving due to the wind, but that shadow was as still as an image. So there I am, thinking, well, I should probably turn the light on, and by that time, I see a shadow move at the end of my bed, which left me absolutely frozen. I lay there without saying a word, and I could feel all the hair on my body standing up, like someone put an ice cube down my spine. I have to get up to turn the light on, and as I start moving toward it, I see the shadow moving in a split second, right between the light and me. As you can imagine, I threw a punch in front of me while screaming. First time in that situation, I had no idea how to react. After that, the shadow moved right back to the place where I first saw it in the corner. Lights come on, absolutely nothing in the room with me. So I went to the living room and slept on the sofa with all the lights on. It was the first time I ever felt threatened like that. When we finally moved the next day, I told my dad. He's not a believer at all, so he looked at me pretty strangely. I told my mom about it, and she then told me that when they bought the house, there was a family back a few years before living in it, and the father had murdered his son and his wife before killing himself. So I take it that the running and handprints were probably the kid, and maybe this tall figure was the father. To make things worse, ever since, anyone who stayed overnight with me tells me that they can hear things that are strange and can't seem to explain what. I also have two of my friends that told me when I sent them a selfie on Snapchat that they could see someone behind me. Bear in mind I never said anything to them about it, because I don't want people thinking I'm crazy. I now live with my wife, and she has had a few experiences that are very strange that never happened to her until we met. So I learned to live with weird things happening, and thank God that shadow and that feeling of being powerless never came back.